Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 184 of the Dynasty Junkies podcast, a proud member of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network, or the DAT Network, if you will. And I will with Rocky. Hopefully,
I can't do that sideways. I just do
can't. It's tricky. I know. Dapping it up. That's right. Well, if you already know, we got Rocky with me tonight on the Junkies. How are you tonight, Rock?
Doing good as always. Love being here with you, Andrew, and especially with this guest we have here tonight, who we've both potted with multiple times.
Yes. And the guest we have tonight is someone that I picked specifically because of the weekend that we have. We are looking into right next to, and kind of even in the weekend of the Expo weekend. And this weekend I get to stay at a Airbnb with a bunch of friends. And one of those many friends is the one where we're with us tonight, I guess, is Jeff Bell from Football Guys. How are you doing tonight, Jeff?
Doing well. It's great to see you, Andrew, and great to see you, Rocky. Anytime that we can talk football is fantastic. Anytime we can talk about life or anything else in general is great as well. And anytime we can talk about Dynasty is even better.
Amen to that. That's exactly right. So we're here to talk about the QB landscape tonight. We're going to try to go through each of these positions before the season starts. Now that we're into August and into our weekly show again. But before we get there, we got to talk a little bit about news and notes. There are some things that have popped up. Obviously, I already mentioned the biggest piece of news, which is the Fantasy Football Expo. Technically, I guess officially starts Saturday now. But I know a lot of people go up on Friday for the opening party and the cornhole. I know there are people already there now that are already celebrating and having drinks at George's and going out to eat and all these other fun things. Obviously, none of us are there yet, but we'll be there. Well, two of us anyway will be there soon. Rocky is unable to make it again, sadly. But I think this is going to be a fun. I know, right? This is going to be a fun weekend. It's always one of my favorite weekends of the year. Rocky, I know it was a couple of years ago, I believe, that you were at the Expo, right? 2 years ago?
Yeah, 22? I made it in 22. It's the only year I've been able to make it so far. I wasn't able to get there last year. I was just joking. I have a family vacation starting Sunday this year, so yeah. Sadly, I will not get to see you guys in person, but hopefully in 2025.
Well, you're not alone. I've heard a lot of people that have had that same kind of issue, and having families, and during the summer you try to squeeze everything in, and there's only so much you can do, right? Like I don't have kids, but I have a wife and we have plans, and there are sometimes it works. And so far I've been lucky to get it to work. So
my son is college age, just doing a summer internship, and then has to go back to school. And this was like the 1 week all summer starting Sunday where we could go on bring him on vacation with us. So that's where it had to fall.
Yeah, that tends to happen. Well, Jeff, you're lucky enough to not have a collision, it looks like, and you get to go to the Expo and hang out all weekend. I mean, what are you looking forward to most as a veteran, I guess I'll call it, like someone who's been before?
I mean, seeing friends, I think, is where it all comes down to it. I mean, I think that's the spirit for a lot of the weekend, and meeting people that are in the community that you've never met before is a lot of fun as well. People that support you, consume your content, people that are just nice people, and usually it is just a collection of nice people at the Expo. But it is also one of those opportunities. Like it's gotten a little bit better now where I have a couple windows throughout the year to be able to see these people that you end up talking to almost every single day. But I know, Andrew, we've seen each other like once a month now for like the 3 months in a row now. But that's really where it kind of comes down to.
That's the way to be.
Yeah. I just wanted to reiterate, that is the coolest part of it. Like the actual fantasy football stuff is fine and all that. And we went the year I was there, we went to the Hall of Fame, which is fun. But just getting to see all these people and even some of your not friends, just some of the people you see on the Twitter timeline and like fantasy people that you had never met before, and getting to meet them and talk to them. And it's just really cool.
Yeah, it's actually really fun to kind of see the personality behind the personality. You know what I mean? Like to kind of get to know the real people that are trash talking with you, and kind of get to, have different opinions on things, and get to do it in person is always a good time. I know earlier this week, my wife was like, hang on, I got a question. Why on earth do you need 3 days to talk about fantasy football? And I was like, well, let me break it down for you. And I pretty much told her my plans for the weekend. And at the end of all that, with all the things going on, right? And at the end of all that, she goes, that just seems like so much. I'm like, it is. I'm very excited. You know what I mean? But if you're not into it, it just seems like, ugh, like, why, brother, ew. You know what I mean? Like, why would I go to that? And I was like, oh, I'd love it if you come with me. She's like, oh, no, I will be glad to sit here on the couch and read my book all weekend. Like, that sounds great to me. So yeah, it's not for everybody, but I always tell people too, even if you're not a content, especially if you're not a content creator, it's a great spot to go and hang out and get to know more about those content creators you love. Get to go make more friends, have great conversations. And it is legitimately just like I like to think of it as like a nerdy summer camp weekend. You know what I mean? Like everybody gets to go together and share their thoughts on things. There's almost always football on somewhere because it's preseason and they're always on at weird times. There's a bunch of different events. There's a bunch of live drafts happening on Saturday, then the actual expo with booths and breakouts and all this. Like there's just so much going on. It's such a good time. So I am very much looking forward to my my nerdery weekend, as the rest of us are. And if you're listening to this and you're not going to the expo, figure it out for next year, man. Like Rocky, put a plan together, see if you can get it done early. I don't know if they've released the dates, and if they have, I just haven't paid attention yet. But pay attention to that. Keep following that the FF Expo on Twitter, or X, whatever. I'm gonna call it Twitter forever. But follow them. They'll be the first to release dates and all that. And maybe, hopefully, we can all find each other there next year if we're not here this year. Anything else you guys want to talk about at the expo? I know, again, Rocky's probably having FOMO, so I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on it. I think we're good. We're good. All right, so let's get to what I would consider some of the notes. There are some bad newses more than good newses this time of year. We tend to see a lot of these things that pop up. The biggest news that I put was the Josh Downs injury, but it was before we heard that Rondale Moore was out for the year. I don't think a lot of people were expecting a lot of Rondale Moore, so I don't think it's really that newsworthy that he's out for the year, but I believe that's the first out for the year injury that we've seen this offseason. Is that right, Rocky? Do you think there's others I might have missed?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think anybody else. I was going to say anybody else significant is out for the year, but I could still say anyone significant is still not out for the year. No offense to Rondale Moore. I'm sure it's very significant to him. But
prayers up,
in terms of fantasy perspective, no, I don't think I'm not any skill player that I can remember hearing about that we would even ever think about. So yeah,
and I mean, I put again Josh Downs with the ankle injury might miss the beginning of the season. You know, so far after just one, well, I guess 2.5, whatever you want to call it, preseason games that we've had. You know, like we haven't had a whole lot yet, but Josh Downs is someone that I know I have a lot of shares of. I drafted him a few places on those best ball teams I got just because I felt like that Indy offense is going to be good this year. I did just submit an article for Fantasy Pros talking about deep dynasties, like sleeper options, like deeper roster picks. And I put Alec Pierce on there, which was going to be on that list anyway. Just because, again, I think that, that offense, the rising tide could rise all the boats. But I don't know. I mean, does this change anything for us in Dynasty on Alec Pierce? Does it move him up at all, Jeff? I'm guessing not. I mean, it's only an ankle injury that happens. He'll be out maybe 1 or 2 weeks. I mean, he's not out for like 8 weeks or anything. So I don't think this moves the needle that much, right?
No, I'm not moving much at all off Josh Downs. I mean, Alec Pierce, I know you've got a little special spot in your heart for it.
Gee, I wonder why.
Cincinnati grad.
You've seen.
But no, I think his job is to basically run in a straight line and see if a defender follows him along. But other than that, I don't know that they're going to scheme up a whole lot. If anything, this opens up a little bit more opportunity for Adonai Mitchell to really kind of solidify himself and step up. Maybe, I know early in camp, it has seemed like Pierce has been running above Mitchell, but now with Mitchell kind of moving in there with Downs out, that's going to be my biggest takeaway on, do we get a little bit more? And Adonai Mitchell seems like the type of player, I've heard nothing but positive for him from Colts camp. Once he gets into that lineup, he's going to be difficult to remove.
I completely agree with that. I just know that a lot of the rookies are what I would call overpriced right now, because there's all that, the hope, the optimism is always abundant with rookies. They're all going to do great. And we all know that's not true. So I like to kind of buy I wouldn't say Pierce is a post-hype sleeper. It's not quite, there was no hype, right? Like Pierce didn't really have any hype to be post. But he is one of those guys that I've always had, again, a little bit of a connection to with the UC. But I just don't think he's really had a fair shot, and he may not ever get a fair shot, right? Like he may not get a chance. But on deep rosters, when you're looking at Dynasty, I think you can do worse than Alec Pierce. And again, to kind of bring it back home too, I think Josh Downs is going to be fine. I think he did really well last year. I think that offense kind of obviously sputtered without Anthony Richardson. I almost said Andrew Richardson. I'm like, no, that's my name. But Anthony Richardson, I think, is going to come back strong. I think he's going to have a lot of running yards, and a lot of defenses are going to have to collapse down. There's a whole lot of narrative you can build for a good passing offense there. So I'm still looking at this too on the Josh Downs side, is like, maybe this is a dip that you can buy him if someone in your league is that reactionary, although I doubt it. Some casual leagues, some home leagues, things like that, you might get somebody who hears about that, and maybe you can make a deal and put him in a package or something like that and stash him on your bench. Because I think Josh Downs is still going to be the real deal. even with this injury. I don't think this is going to hamper him too much. I haven't heard of any other major injuries. I know we don't have Frank in the chat like you do on Trade Addicts, Rocky, but are there any other injuries, Jeff, I guess, that come to mind for you that I might have missed?
Well, I do want to make a note on Rondale Moore. If you're in a very deep league, Ray McLeod was already running above Rondale Moore. And so if you're in a very deep league, Ray McLeod is a name that I would look to add very, very deep league. Obviously, he's I think 7th-year veteran, and we've never really seen much out of him. But occasionally we get guys that pop up. I mean, obviously, Puka Nacua has that injury. I think that opens up the door maybe a little bit for Demarcus Robinson even more. And that's going to be, I think he's going to be fine. Puka's going to be fine. I think Christian McCaffrey is going to be fine. It does seem like Jordan Mason has a lot of more positive buzz on him. And I've seen some positive buzz on Cody Schrader. That basically the note that I was reading last night was they're not sure if they're going to keep 3 backs or 4 backs, but if they keep 4, it's probably going to be Cody Schrader as that 4th back. So just kind of, those are top of mind injuries that I've seen, but it does seem like, Donta Foreman is back at practice. That was a scary one. Like he's been mobilized when he came off, but he is back, and we are not going to have Nick Chubb for a little bit of time probably. So I think that's an opportunity there.
That's not a bad one. And I know the Niners signed Matt Breida, which I thought was an interesting sign that they might be, concerned about their depth here in the early part of the season. I've heard some noise about Isaac Guerrero maybe being kind of like an IR stash for them and like a red shirt. And so I'm hearing a lot of what you're hearing too, Jeff. It's like there's a lot of chaos in that backfield, but I'm not lowering McCaffrey at all. Like, I don't think that this changes any of your outlook on the main guys. It's more like for deeper roster stashes. If you've got Cody Schrader on a bench somewhere, or you're on a waiver, which I'm guessing most waivers have him available in a deeper league, a 14 team start 11, something like that, or 45 man rosters. I mean, he's probably not available, but that's not a bad angle if you're looking at something. I know too, this is the time of year where I start to kind of churn the bottom of my roster anyway. Just to kind of pick up on some spikes. I mean, you're going to start to see some players that show off in these games, like Tyrone Tracy and Eric Gray both did something tonight for the Giants, right? And it may not matter at all, but some of that will have a little bit of value to it. And you can pick up a guy off waivers and trade him for a third on this kind of news alone, and then they never do anything. Well, now you just got a free third off waivers. That ain't bad. And those little tiny marginal trades can add up, So like I like to play that game a little bit, and you can start to drop players that, like Kendrick Bourne or Sky Moore, like these players that you just have hope for, and the receivers, they may never be there. Those are 2 other guys that I put in my article too, actually, as deep stashes, but it's like, they're going to stay on the waivers. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not afraid of somebody grabbing one of those guys. You can probably get them after all this goes through. So that's kind of the fun part of the game, and the fun part of this year that we're going to get into here is this next, 4 weeks is going to be a little bit chaotic and kind of hopefully in a good way. But yeah, I think the other thing, just to kind of tie back to that for a second, the other thing that I'm excited about anyway is, like you said, Ray McLeod. I have him in Scott Fishbowl, right? And he was supposed to be the punt returner and kind of had some flash for that. I'm kind of excited about what these punts and kicks are going to look like. I don't know if we're going to see a lot of touchdowns. I don't really know what to expect. But anytime you can get an extra couple of touches for a guy, I mean, that adds to the upside, right? And if you're going to put a guy on your bench, someone like a Ray McLeod should see more playing time now. I don't think that takes away from his punts, but again, it gives you another piece of the puzzle to have on your roster in case you're looking for a flex spot somewhere. You never know.
I think I had heard a quote from Matt Prater talking about the kickoffs, because he kind of said he thought, that's obviously Cardinals kicker Matt Prater thought that basically 50% of the kicks he thought would be kicked out of the end zone like normal, and about 50% they might try to do. But I think it's really going to come down to if the kicker can master hanging it up in that landing zone, and if they can master that, and like we see, college got really into that, where there would be kind of shifting to one side and trying to hang the ball up. And I don't remember Urban Meyer would do it all the time, and it would drive me crazy because you'd have these random kick returns that would be allowed for no reason at all, but they really tried to focus on that. So I think if you're going to have these kickers that are good at that are able to hang it up there like a punt, and the coverage team is able to get on top of that and have minimal yardage, they'll kick it off. And I think otherwise they're just going to bang it out of the end zone. I don't know if I was excited about seeing the XFL stuff, and the potential is certainly there, especially in Scott Fishbowl, the way that scoring works out. Yep. But I think I'm a believer that if it's going to be beneficial at all to special teams to return it, then coaches aren't going to mess around with it. They're just
Correct.
going to kill it, basically.
It becomes kind of like everybody's trying to outsmart the other. And in the end, I think it ends up with the same result, right? Where if we start kicking it to Devin Hester, we're just going to stop kicking it to Devin Hester. Well, okay, then the whole thing is moot, right? But I do like that they're trying. I think it's an interesting tweak and a fun way to kind of keep the rules moving and to kind of keep the game fun, because normally that has been, in the last few years anyway, the least fun part of the game, right? Touchdown. Okay, great. Commercial, field goal, commercial, kickoff, commercial. Like, can we just get back to the game? So I don't mind it being a little bit more exciting. And I think the other name I wanted to bring up, and I don't think we did yet during the Rondale Moore discussion, he was third on the depth chart, obviously behind Drake London and the newly formed Falcon, Darnell Mooney, which I think could be an interesting pick for fantasy leagues, right? Darnell Mooney, formerly of the Bears, and had some value there. I think the Falcons could be looking to funnel more targets to their top guys, and maybe Ray gets left out, and maybe this is a bonus and a benefit to the top two. So there's a whole bunch of moving pieces, and I'm sure as we get even to next week, when we have our show next week, we'll have more of these to talk about. We don't do a lot of breaking news, but this is that time of year where you want to at least try to be informed as much as you can. Moving guys into IR and picking guys up off the waivers and things like that. Use those spots as you can. I think that can really make a difference. So we'll kind of move on to our main topic of the night. And like I mentioned at the start, we're going to be talking about QBs tonight. I got on the show sheet here the 1QB DLF ADP, which as of this point is still just from July. I don't think that their August drafts have finished yet. I think when I heard that they were starting a little bit later, and then with the Expo, I would be shocked if they're going to be updated this weekend. So part of me thinks that we might just have this for the next week or so even. I guess I don't really know how we want to dive into this. So Rocky, I'll ask you these questions and we'll kind of go Rocky, Jeff, and then myself maybe for these first couple. But I just put a couple of talking points on the show sheet here, which the first one, I always tend to look at this and how we value quarterbacks. 1QB versus Superflex is obviously a big difference, but within the position, that's really what we're talking about. So whether it's 1QB or Superflex, I see there being a little difference, but I figured it's 1QB. A lot of people still play 1QB. Let's kind of go with those as a start. But Rocky, which I guess of the top 36, which are listed here, which of these would you consider to be overvalued for Dynasty? Is there anybody that sticks out that you're just kind of like entirely off on at their current value right now?
The one that sticks out the most for me is probably Anthony Richardson. I
QB6?
get the upside, yeah, but QB6 is pretty rich to me. And he did look good in the limited time last year, but he still has yet to do it over a full season. And I just always have a problem with us propping these young guys up simply because they're young and have potential. I always like to see something first, and to me, 3 or 4 games or whatever it was not enough to make him QB6. To have him over a Joe Burrow, over a Kyler Murray, even over a Jordan Love at this point. And I think, and I get why people would put him there, but to me, it's too rich. And I would even say that like Caleb Williams is at QB9. That to me is too expensive. Like I get the upside, but I need to see it first before I'm willing to pay those prices.
I'm with you on that. Jeff, where are you at with Anthony Richardson? And then is he you're overvalued, or is there someone else you feel like would be a better, winner of that award?
I'm okay with that quarterback 6 value, because if he does what he did in small samples, if he stretches that out to a season, he's going to be quarterback 1 in Dynasty. And that's the biggest thing. If he's starting to string together 25, 30-point games, I mean, his ceiling is so high from what we saw of that. And that's where you're kind of splitting the middle on him. Of like, Joe Burrow doesn't have quarterback 1 overall in Dynasty in play. That there would be just half the quarterbacks would have to retire out of the league for that to happen. No offense, Andrew, to your Bengals there, but I think if Richardson does deliver on the glimpses that he showed, that's where you're kind of splitting the middle, and that's where he ends up at quarterback 6. Guy that I think is maybe a little bit overvalued, CJ Stroud, to me is a little bit overvalued because I've really not understood it in redraft leagues, where I'm seeing him go in redraft leagues, because I understand obviously adding Stephon Diggs, having that depth of wide receiver there. But I mean, I'm an Ohio State fan. It's well known. And I have been watching CJ Stroud for his entire career, and I have been begging CJ Stroud to just take off and run so many times, and he just doesn't do it. And if he's not going to do that in fantasy, to be able to deliver on the value that gets put on him currently at ADP in Dynasty, at ADP in redraft leagues, I mean, he would have to be throwing 35 touchdowns a year, 40 touchdowns a year to be able to deliver off of that. And so that's where I'm a little bit iffy on putting him at the quarterback 5. I think that you're kind of scraping the ceiling there relative to, talk about Anthony Richardson, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels. All those players can easily be more valuable than Stroud at the end of this year.
Interesting. Yeah, I think Stroud at QB5 is a little rich for me, much like I feel like Anthony Richardson at 6 is a little rich for me. I'd rather wait. I just feel like they're the top of that next tier to me. And I'd rather, if I'm doing anything, I'd rather get the bottom of that tier than the top, just to pay a little less. I don't think there's anything wrong with the valuation. It's just how I tend to draft. I don't tend to go for the best guys in a group. I tend to wait till I have 1 or 2 and then go with them. But my answer is Jaden Daniels. I can't believe he's currently going ahead of Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence, Brock Purdy. Like, I get it. He's got a lot of talent, but rookie QBs have a lot to adjust to. And that Washington offense is, I mean, it could be great, right? It could be. And Jaden Daniels could be worth QB 11 price. Man, that might be a ceiling though, too. Like, we don't know yet. So I think that's a really risky move for me. I don't mind Caleb Williams at 9. I kind of get some of that logic being the number 1 overall, and obviously has a ton of talent, all this, that, and the other. And Jaden Daniels is not a bum. Don't hear me the wrong way. But remember, was it a year ago? Bryce Young was supposed to be that guy, or like there were a bunch of people talking about him, and he's QB 21 now, right? We've got JJ McCarthy at QB 19. That feels a little high to me too. He may not even start the season. It blows my mind how much people are willing to spend at QB, especially in 1 QB leagues. I'd much rather wait and get a guy like Goff or Watson even. And I'm not a Watson fan, or Stafford, those guys later on, and just kind of roll the dice and just see how it goes rather than paying up for the guys like Stroud or Richardson, or even, to be honest with you, even Daniels or May or something like that. I'm not into the rookies this year. I just like to see it first.
I just want to say too, back to the Richardson thing, and it kind of goes with some of the other guys we've been talking about. I get what Jeff said. Like, I was acknowledging that when I was saying Richardson. But the if is a bigger thing to me than I think it is to Jeff. Like, I'm not willing to bet on that if. I also think there's a chance. And again, he looked good passing the ball in the very few games we saw last year, but he didn't look great at it in college at times. And I think there's just maybe not just as much chance, because he did look good, but there is a chance, and we've seen many a rookie quarterback not last through their rookie contract. If he starts looking more like a Justin Fields, Justin Fields had great potential too, and also was a running quarterback. So I get it. I need more to pay. I don't pay up for quarterbacks anyway, but if I was ever going to, I'm not paying for one that I don't know is going to score me this. Like, I need to see it at least a year.
Yeah, I think that's why CJ Stroud is up there, because people saw it for a year, right? And so CJ Stroud
saying too, because he doesn't have the rushing upside either.
Correct. So I think the ceiling is probably higher on Richardson. I would say maybe the floor is higher on Stroud, and it kind of depends on which one you prefer. Maybe that's a way to split that hair a little bit. I guess on the other side, then, who would you say is undervalued looking at this list? Jeff, I'll go to you first. Which of these guys do you feel like is a steal, I guess, at their current ADP?
Josh Allen at quarterback 2.
You know what? I had a feeling the Bills fan was going to say Josh Allen. I should have known.
You're a little bit tongue in cheek, but no, I mean, I'm still taking him at my quarterback 1. Undervalued, kind of running through. I think maybe Jordan Love might be a little bit undervalued when you look at the age there.
QB 10.
That really
too low.
Kind of. Okay. Trevor Lawrence and Brock Purdy, I feel like, are a little bit undervalued when you look at the situation that Brock Purdy's in, the talent around him. I mean, I understand you don't want to buy into the talent given the way he came into the league, but if he does this year what he did last year, I mean, that's kind of undeniable at that point. And then Lawrence, I think, too, I think Lawrence is just incredibly underrated by fantasy football circles, because he's been a quarterback 1 like the last 2 years, and I know that there's frustration about, and people view him as having a lower ceiling, but it's like he's being a quarterback 1 and you're still frustrated. It's like, I understand the hype that came in with him, and we thought that he would be up in that tier with Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and he hasn't gotten there, but at the same time, he's still delivering very, very well in fantasy.
No, I agree with you. And Lawrence at QB 14 and Purdy at QB 15 on this ADP. So like just outside that QB 1 range that we usually like to use for 12 team leagues. But I'm right there with you. I think that Lawrence was going to be my pick too. I just think that Purdy makes me a little nervous just because, Mr. Irrelevant and all the drama around that. And it feels like anybody who can throw any sort of 3-yard pass to McCaffrey could be a good quarterback in that offense. I'm not trying to, belittle what Purdy has done there, but I just don't get the vibe that he's running that offense. It's more like he's managing it and it's working well. But Lawrence feels like he's still got it. And I think he's had some bad luck maybe, or some bad teams or some bad offenses. I don't know how to word it exactly, but I'm with you. I think he could be a QB1 yet again, and you're getting him at a pretty solid discount. Rocky, anybody that you think on this list is undervalued other than Jalen Hurts for your Eagles?
I was not going to say Jalen Hurts.
Okay,
but the first name that came to mind is not going to surprise definitely you, Andrew, maybe Jeff too, but Kirk Cousins.
There you go.
24. I get he's old. I get he's very old for any position. He's I think 34 or 35 now. But assuming he comes back from the injury, okay. He's been a QB1 without any rushing ability the last 2 years in points per game. At least by trade addict scoring. That's what I usually go by. QB6 and QB11. And then obviously last year was cut short. And it's not like he's got a massive he's moving to a new team. It's not like he's got a massive downgrade in talent around him in Atlanta. And I will take 2 to 3 years of Kirk Cousins at QB24 prices all day long. And then to me, the other guy that I was looking at is sort of, to me, the new potential Kirk Cousins, because I've been a Kirk guy for like years and years because everybody hates him. Jared Goff at QB18.
Yes. Yep.
I always look for that. I know I'm not getting the guy who's going to finish at QB1 the way I usually handle quarterback. And Jared Goff is never going to be QB1, barring some crazy outlier 50 touchdown season or something. But he's good. He's got the potential and he's done it the last 2 years to be high end 2, low end 1. And that's all I'm looking for generally out of my quarterbacks. Yep. And he again, another guy got great talent around him with Gibbs and Amon-Ra and Laporta. It's a cheap. I mean, he's below. Cousins is like below Bo Nix. I'll take Cousins over Bo Nix all day. Goff's below. I would rather have, and Purdy may outdo him this year. I'd rather have Goff over Purdy. I have more faith in Goff to consistently produce than Purdy if something goes wrong. If Christian McCaffrey goes out for the year, Brandon Ayuk gets traded, something like that. So yeah.
No, I'm with you on Goff. I think Goff is going to have a great year. I think the Lions are going to have a great year. I feel like if Amon-Ra St. Brown is top 5 receiver and Sam Laporta is the number 1 tight end and Gibbs is a top 10 running back, how is Goff not a top 20 quarterback option, obviously? And then it's like, well, at that point, all those guys are high upside. He's going to get plenty of touchdowns. The narrative should build itself. They're going to be playing a lot of games from ahead. Goff doesn't hate running the ball. I mean, he doesn't necessarily run a lot, but he's not like afraid to do it. And I think there's a chance that, QB 12 to 15 for him. That's all I'm looking for. I'm right there with you. Jeff, anything else you want to add on this, on the undervalued side?
Yeah. Michael, why is Michael Penix quarterback 29 behind Aaron Rodgers, Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith? This is one quarterback. I understand, if you want to make the argument in Superflex that when you're comparing him to a Bo Nix or to a JJ McCarthy that you might get earlier production, this is one quarterback. And you're banking a bet on a young player at quarterback 29. That makes no sense at all. That to me, that feels like a remnant of Superflex combined with some laziness to have him down there. Would you really rather have Geno Smith and one quarterback over Michael Penix? I mean, Geno Smith, how often is going to be your starting quarterback? Not very often, I wouldn't think. So that's where I think that's insane. And you look at JJ McCarthy, there's a lot of talk about he might not even play this year. So why is there a 50-pick gap between JJ McCarthy, who seems like the Vikings aggressively want to redshirt, and Michael Penix, who we know is going to redshirt? That makes no sense to me whatsoever.
The name that stood out to me on this list was Jordan Travis at QB 33. Like, that feels like rookie draft fever going insane. Like, the backup to Aaron Rodgers is the 33rd quarterback. Like, he's going ahead of both New Orleans quarterbacks. Like, there's no way.
Well, he's not even the backup. Tyrod Taylor's the backup.
That's kind of what I'm saying. Like,
I didn't even know he's over Derek Carr.
Yeah, he's above Derek Carr, who is currently a starter. Like, I get that one QB, you want to plan on the future and you don't want to have a guy down there, but I'd rather have Spencer Rattler than Derek Carr at this point. I just feel like Carr's leash is the shortest in the NFL. We'll have to see what happens, but that's an interesting angle to take. And I don't want to get through all of the names because we definitely have a couple more questions I want to get to. And we talked about this a little bit before the show started about having the most shares of these players. And that's a little tricky with Dynasty Planet being on the COVID list. Maybe, I don't know. They're on the pup. They're unable to perform right now. But Rocky, which of these quarterbacks, other than Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff and those older guys, right? Is there anybody on this list that you feel like you just
other than the older guys?
Well, I'm trying to word it in a way that we get deeper on your list. Like, is there any of these guys you find yourself you end up drafting a lot in redraft, or that you kind of trade for a lot in Dynasty that as we get into the 2024 season, maybe?
Yeah, we talked about how Dynasty Plan is a little wonky at this point, but it looks about right when I did pull it up, when I saw who was kind of Kirk Cousins is near the top. But I also have in many leagues, over 30 leagues, I have 7 shares of Tua and 5 of Hurts. And
there you go.
Hurts especially is another guy that I was buying when he was cheaper. Like after his first or second year. Kind of on that potential upside, but he wasn't QB6. He was more like QB 12-ish, or I think around that point. And I was willing to pay those prices because just like Jeff was saying about Anthony Richardson, I saw potential, to be QB1 overall. So I will pay up for quarterbacks if I think they're cheaper. It's something I've done a couple times with Kyler Murray over the past year, especially before last season. He was really down, coming off the injury and all that, his value. So I will buy, some of the higher end quarterbacks at discounted prices if I can. So that's kind of, it looks like it's basically old guys and Hurts and Tua. Like Matthew Stafford is another one that's up there.
I like that. Well, Stafford was going to be the ones that I mentioned. Like Stafford, I've got a bunch of shares of Stafford because nobody wants him, but I think that Rams offense is going to be better than people think. Someone else who I have a lot of shares of is Joe Milton in New England. I really like that landing spot for him. I think that there is some camp hype for him, and I don't know if he ever sees the actual starting lineup in my roster or anything, but if he's getting hype, that's the time of year I want to trade him away and kind of see what I can get for him. I got him dirt cheap in some auction leagues or off waivers, even, 4th round picks, things like that in super flex leagues. So I'm happy with that. So I've got a bunch of those kind of guys. I've also got, I think it was Jake Browning still as one of my top rostered too, just because I'm terrified of Burrow getting hurt again. And so like, it's just, I don't want this to happen again. So I'm going to have a lot more of that Browning guy. But Jeff, what about you? Who do you feel like you have a lot of?
Well, I was going to say one more I wanted to mention just because I thought it was funny before I go to Jeff. And this is a product of deep rosters in a lot of my leagues and me being lazy. I still have 8 shares of Tom Brady on my rosters. Talking about old guys, 8 shares of Tom Brady I've never cut. So,
I don't know if that's something you want to put out in the world, right?
Well,
I was doing the dance, like I was adding Andrew Luck going into every offseason and just off the off chance.
The first year of Keith, I think I had way more than 8. The first year after he retired, I was like, yeah, I'll see if there was talk maybe 3 or 4 year stretch. Yeah, but I don't know why I had that many. I still haven't cut. I just thought it was funny.
Yeah, I have a lot of Josh Allen because I'm a Bills fan, and it was on him when he was a little bit cheaper. And so one of my favorite picks of all time, my home league, we did a startup in 2020, and I traded a future first for a 3rd round pick that turned into Josh Allen, and that first ended up being the 112. So that was just a beautiful trade that we'll always remember that one. But I've got Allen. I've been buying Bryce Young this offseason. I think there was enough around there last year where he wasn't around NFL talent. His coaching was atrocious. That offensive line was a mess. That I still believe in the talent enough, and I think they've done some aggressive things to position him better. So I've got a good amount of him. I've been buying Michael Penix because I play Dynasty for more than just 1 year. And if I can get a top 8 pick that's got great weapons around him in a great passing environment for deeply discounted prices, I'll do that. I did have a lot of Jordan Love, like off that same thought process. And then I sold a lot of Jordan Love because I got a little bit nervous about going into last year. So I don't have as much Jordan Love as I would like to have anymore. But no, I think in like Will Levis is kind of like same similar situation where I grabbed him late last year. And just because like seeing you got like Davis Mills or these quarterbacks that have temporary value that you want to, I feel like I want to be a little bit more aggressive and cash in on it. But yeah, if you bet wrong, like I did some places with Jordan Love, that's not as fun to have just a random 111 in the league instead of Jordan Love. But I kind of ended up with some of those, but that's kind of where my exposure lies at the top of my board.
I think that's a fair point. I still have a couple shares of Desmond Ritter. You never know. You know what I'm saying? Like
I
some
do
of those
too.
guys, like just you got to hold on. And especially in Superflex, I love to stash my bench with quarterbacks just because I feel like their values can spike faster and bigger than a lot of the other positions. So I don't think there's ever anybody that I'm like entirely off of. And I mean, I put who are we avoiding, but I feel like that's because it's the same kind of question that I was going to get to next, which will kind of combine. But like, who are you avoiding or who are you trading away? Like, is there anybody on your rosters that you just don't want on your team? I think for me anyway, there's only a handful of those. Derek Carr is the easy one, but nobody's going to give you anything for him, right? Like Derek Carr, like I mentioned before, shortest leash. I like trading players away that have value. So for me, a lot of the times the people or the players that I'm avoiding are kind of at the top of the tier. And if you go to the top of the top, I don't think I have any Pat Mahomes in Dynasty. I don't think I have any. I think I might have one Jalen Hurts left. Like I just don't want those guys at the top. I'd rather split that asset up. So for me anyway, when I get down to this, like who are we trading away is the guys worth the most. I'd rather tear down and add a running back or add a receiver, add some depth somewhere else. I just feel like, yeah, they're great to have the Josh Allens, Lamar Jacksons, things like that up at the top. But if I can trade away Pat Mahomes and get like a Joe Burrow plus a running back, I'm happy as hell to do that. Like, yeah, I sacrifice a couple of points on that, but I'm adding depth, which almost always ends up helping me out in the long run. So, Rocky, is there anybody that you're avoiding in general, or any groups maybe that you're avoiding, or any teams that you're avoiding, anything like that?
Well, I mean, we know I'm generally avoiding most of the top guys, but not
Yeah.
because I don't like them, just because I don't want to pay for them. I don't think I have one Allen that I inherited it on in an orphan I took over a couple years ago and haven't tiered down from or anything. And no Mahomes. I think one Lamar. We talked about Hurts. But there's no looking at this list. I don't think there's anyone I'm particularly avoiding. The one guy that I thought of when I saw that question was maybe JJ McCarthy, which I don't have any JJ McCarthy, just because I'm not a big believer. I know he does have his faithful that think he is going to be a stud in the NFL, and a lot of people are like me and don't think he's going to do anything in the NFL. So I don't even know how to say that. I just think he's a much bigger question mark and not someone I'm willing to invest in. I'm not saying I definitely think this isn't Zach Wilson for me. Zach Wilson came in the league and I was sure he was going to be crap in the NFL, and I was right. So I got to keep touting that one because it's like one of the few things I've been right about over the last 2 years. So,
Pat yourself in the back.
but
Right.
I just, yeah, it's just, and I know on this list he's not particularly high, but it's just, it's not someone I've been willing to invest a first round pick in, which is what you had to do this year. So, if I was going to call anybody someone I'm avoiding, quote unquote, it would probably be him.
That's a fair answer. Jeff, what about you? Anybody you're avoiding or trying to trade away that you're just kind of like ready to move on from with the QB position?
I tried aggressively early in the offseason to get off Geno Smith where I had him, but that was before they added Sam Howell, and kind of like adding Sam Howell, even though I don't know that Sam Howell is necessarily great by any shakes, but that was kind of one of those things that in our dynasty minds takes the air out of the balloon and makes it more difficult to trade. I've moved off of Dak Prescott in some spots, but it was an opportunity. Like I remember there was a trade a year ago where I had a chance to move Dak Prescott and some pieces into Joe Burrow and some pieces that I did. There was another one where it was vividly remember when Calvin Ridley was coming back. I was able to trade Calvin Ridley and Dak Prescott and get Lamar Jackson in a league, and I was pretty thrilled about that one. So that kind of stuff like that, starting to move off of some of the older guys, I guess, would be the biggest thing. Or a guy like Will Levis, if I can kind of move off of that. We've sound like a great camp from Levis, and I might be wrong there. But if I'm able to get, I look at that as I used a late or mid second round pick or early second round pick ish. And so if I can turn that into a first round pick or sprinkle something on top to grab a first round pick for Will Levis, those are the types of things that I tend to do right now.
Yeah, and I think this is where some of this talk can even pivot into a strategy type talk, because I think a lot of us who are playing Superflex leagues, I know myself, I feel like I'm different than a lot of the other people I play against. I'm more on the Rocky side of just grab two guys that are starting on the older side and don't pay up for them, and then maybe spend your capital, however you want to word it, at other positions. I just feel like that makes it feels like my team is better that way. Or at least I feel more confident and can sleep a little easier knowing my team is a little bit more balanced. But there is some value in that studs and duds kind of an approach. And I've seen some teams, especially again in Superflex, with like a Pat Mahomes and Dak Prescott just go all the way, right? And like sometimes that is hard to defend against on the side of starting a roster that can put up more points than that. that gets tricky because some of those guys can put up 50 without even really thinking about it because they can throw 4 touchdowns, no problem. So I guess the finishing question in a sense on this QB talk, I know Rocky and I are pretty much on the same page, but Rocky, what do you look for in QBs in Dynasty? Like, what is your overall thesis, if I could ask a question that broad?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of touched on it as we've gone through this whole conversation. I basically feel like, if I can get good to slightly above average production out of the quarterback position, I'm fine, and I can make it up at other positions. And I'm less afraid of than most of having to cycle through different guys, like cycling from in the past, Ben Roethlisberger and Drew Brees to Kirk Cousins to Matthew Stafford to Jared Goff to I just figure out a way to churn it every year, not every year, but at least every few years. And what I'm always looking for too, though, is guys that I think can finish in that that have QB1 upside, not the QB1, but
right.
QB1. If they hit their ceilings that year, 8 to 12, something like that. That's what I'm looking for. Cousins, I think, has that virtually every year. Again, we'll see with the injury if that affects it. Goff, I think, has that, although, like I said, I looked, I think it was QB 14 both the last 2 years, so it hasn't quite gotten there. But like guys like sometimes, like I remember for a couple of years, people would say Derek Carr is like one of the guys I like, or he's not. I never thought he very, very, very early in his career when he was worth more, he actually maybe had that potential, but for years you kind of knew he was never finishing in that range. So I'm not often going to have the running quarterbacks unless, like I said, I can get a Jalen Hurts or Kyler Murray at the cheaper values. And I get that there's a lot more upside there, but I'll take the 8 to 14 type guys. And age doesn't matter to me at all. If they're younger, older, whatever.
Age ain't nothing but a number to Rocky. You heard it here first.
I don't expect to have any player on my roster for more than 3 to 4 years at most, anyway. So I'm not worried that Kirk Cousins is 35 or that Jared Goff is pushing 30 soon or anything like that. So,
well, I'm glad you said that. I'm kind of on the same page. I tend to want to see it to believe it. And you mentioned that about Richardson, right? Like you want to see it for a year. So I love that we have Jeff on, who is one of the better Debbie content creators I've been involved with and have talked to, like someone who's more involved with college and the rookies and all that. I mean, does that translate through to how you play the game too, though, Jeff? Do you feel like you lean a little more on the rookies and try to catch up there, or do you have a different strategy than what we're talking about here?
So in Superflex, I have my 2 quarterbacks. I'm more of the set it and forget it. I like to have I like to be aggressive in the startup, or to have like my home league. I have Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, and it's pretty comforting to have Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and just not even think about it. And then it's kind of almost like ideally building the room similar to how the Packers look at their quarterback room, where I've got those cornerstone pieces in my top 2 spots, and I'm kind of cycling through younger players in the rookie drafts or kind of adding those in the back end. And then maybe when one of those spots hits, that's when you look to maybe trade Mahomes or something like that, to kind of like always have that building cycle between having. I don't usually have. I like to have a third safety blanket quarterback, and not like a high end option, but
like Lamar Jackson.
Right now you can, but like right now you can grab a Bryce Young as a third quarterback, and that feels pretty good to have Bryce Young as your third quarterback, because if he hits, that opens up quite a bit. We saw last year the production from, you talk about Jake Browning on your rosters, but some of these backup quarterbacks that it's not Scott Mullins. There was a old quarterback that's Scott Mullins, but the guy Nick Mullins.
Mullins, there you go. Yeah,
gave some usable weeks at the end of last year with the Vikings there. So some things like that can be okay, but I do like to go into the season feeling like I do have a little bit of a safety blanket of that third quarterback, a young player I have high hopes for that's developing. So.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of add on and maybe play the middle, I like having one set it and forget it, like a Joe Burrow or a Anthony Richardson, even a Kyler Murray, to be honest with you. Like somebody like that I can like not worry about. And then having maybe somebody else in that QB 20 to 25 range, someone else like a Will Levis or a Baker Mayfield. I've got a lot of teams this year that I'm looking at it already, and I've got Stafford and Mayfield as my 2 quarterbacks. I'm like, well, it ain't pretty, but it'll get the job done. Like that's probably going to be better than starting my 5th receiver in that super flex spot. Like I don't hate it. Now, obviously that could crash and burn in a year and I'm looking to rebuild again. Like you never know, but I feel like some of those cheaper quarterback options, especially in a rebuild, are easier to acquire and can put you into contention quicker. And so sometimes, and the way I look at it is kind of the way Rocky said too, I don't tend to have quarterbacks on my roster for 5 years. It's just not how I play the game. I tend to be way too active in trading. And so my logic is, well, let's take a look at the quarterback anyway, a quarterback more like redraft and say, well, who do I think is going to do well this year? I want to contend every year, right? I don't want to be one of those perpetual rebuilds. I'd almost rather be, almost always in the playoffs and never winning than never in the playoffs. Like I'd rather because you can get in the playoffs and get hot. We've seen it every year. There have been a number of leagues that I've been in where the best team dominates all season and loses in the first round of the playoffs. Like, what did that do for you? Yeah, you had Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen, but your running backs all just shit the bed that one week. You know what I mean? Like, it happens. And so for me, it's like, if you get me into the playoffs, maybe I catch lightning in a bottle and I make it happen. So I'm more than happy to go with the cheaper options at quarterback, especially because it's a onesie position, but not really. In Superflex, you're obviously playing more. But again, the lower side, I'm not going to be starting a Jordan Travis at QB 33. I'm not starting that person in that Superflex spot. I'm not starting Jake Browning unless he's starting, right? So like there are some of those where I have a really shaky roster. I think there's one, I was just looking at this team. I think I have Tua Tagovailoa and Desmond Ridder. And I think the other one was not Malik Willis, but like Kenny Pickett. That was the other one. And I'm just like, well, this team looked great 3 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, whew, but now I am struggling. And I'm looking at it like, well, maybe I trade Tua and tear down and just kind of even go lower from there to get 2 starters. So that's where I think everything can change in a heartbeat. And I think too, I'd rather get the cheaper quarterbacks and contend rather than pay up and live long and prosper. Yeah, it's nice to have set it and forget it, but I am way too impatient with a lot of my teams, and I'm fine trading anybody away. Like everybody's got a price I'm willing to send. But I think that covers us pretty well for QBs. Rocky, was there anything else you wanted to hit on or talk about in terms of quarterbacks before we move on to find me a trade?
The only other thing I was thinking of was that I just wanted to throw in here as a mention, just in terms of the whole quarterback position is, especially only in Superflex. I do like to roster. I like to roster the worth nothing backups, kind of like the Jake Brownings, but anybody that on a good team is basically a good offensive team, even if they're not very good. I have a lot of those type of guys. Like if you can get them cheap, Kenny Pickett's the only name that's coming to mind right now.
Like Cooper Rush.
I like even cheaper than that. Yeah, Cooper Rush, something like that.
Yeah,
guys like that you can even get off waivers a lot of the time, and just. Even if they're not that good, if they're throwing to a CD Lamb and Jake Ferguson, or throwing to an AJ Brown and Devontae Smith or whatever, or Jake Browning's case, T. Higgins or Jamar Chase, they're going to pop off for some games just because of the talent around them. And it's nice if an injury happens to happen and one of those guys just happens to be on your roster.
Well, I had a lot of Jake Browning because it feels like Cincinnati never gets anything good. So I'm always just expecting that next injury to come, well, might as well have Browning. So when it happens, at least I got something. Jeff, anything else you wanted to cover on QBs before we move on?
No, but you talk about Jake Browning there real quick, and I think that he showed enough last year that if he does play this year and shows some promise, I think somebody's going to give him a shot. If he, I kind of feel bad for the guy a little bit, because I think had he been, instead of being an exclusive rights free agent, had he been an actual free agent at this stage of his career last offseason, I think he could be sitting in like the Gardner Minshew role or something like that,
100%.
where somebody would have given him a shot to be their guy. I mean, the Titans might have brought him in with Brian Callahan going there, and he might be
I was worried about that.
Will Levis or something like that. So like that, those backup quarterbacks, like in that type of situation that have shown flashes, I think can be good speculative plays. We see it with Sam Darnold, where that was forgotten about, or Baker Mayfield was forgotten about, and now all of a sudden they return value again.
Well, I expected Jake Browning to get signed or traded or whatever you want to call it in whatever version he was to the Chiefs. That was actually where I thought for sure that was going to happen. I'm like, I just have this feeling that they know it's all landing on Mahomes and they need a better backup. And, they just signed Mahomes to this massive deal. I'm like, watch them go out and get our backup, because that's kind of how that goes in the AFC, right? But no, I'm right there with you. And I think to Rocky's point too, like I said it before. I like having extra quarterbacks on my bench. It just makes me feel a little better, a little more protected. And then if you're contending, that's great. You can start them. If you're not contending, that's great. You can trade them. Like there's really a rare bad time to have extra quarterbacks, especially in Superflex. Now, one QB, I may only roster, 3 quarterbacks on a 28-man roster. Like you just don't need that many. But Superflex, I'm fine rostering, 8 out of 28. Like just go super deep at QB and running back and figure the rest out as we go. So with that, we're going to move on. We didn't have any listener league updates. We don't have any trades this week. We didn't have anything in the Junkies. It was, again, quiet week. I feel like it happens as we've all gotten into more leagues. It gets a little bit trickier. But with that, we are definitely going to head to our favorite segment of the week. And you know what I got to do, Rocky? I got to play this.
Find me a trade.
Yeah, Brian Harr, find me a trade. That's right. So this one comes to us from Steve Munger. No longer on Twitter, but he's in Dynasty Junkies 2, and I sent him a note on GroupMe in there. This is a Safe Leagues Dynasty. It's a deluxe dynasty. I'm in one of these myself. His team name is Already Forgot My Team Name, which is a running theme. I think that's sort of like his team name in Junkies 2, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I love that. Just it keeps it all similar. But if you're not familiar, Safe Leagues are usually 12 teams, Superflex, 1 PPR, but then an extra PPR for tight end. So it's a very heavy tight end premium. It is a start 10 with 1 QB, 2 running back, 3 receiver, 1 tight end, 2 flex, and that 1 super flex. I've got the roster up here. While I get that started, Rocky, why don't you read his comments that he put in the post?
Sure. He says he's entering the second year of a tear it down and rebuild. He had 3 sets of 24 picks. So I'm not sure.
Yeah.
He got all of somebody's.
He got the whole brand. Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
So the X01, X05, X08 of every round, plus some others with Stroud and Pitts being his only carryover anchor pieces for the rebuild. He traded the 101, 201, 301 for Hurts prior to the 24 rookie draft. Made a number of rookie picks, some trades, and thinks he's in good shape at quarterback and tight end, but has work to do at wide receiver and running back, which I'd agree with. And he says, I'm comfortable having an RB room without any elites, which, Steve, that is definitely the case. I'm in a few leagues with him, and he's very much a 0 RB type of guy. But he says even for him, this is a bit barren.
Yeah, this one's a little lighter than I like.
What should be my next step in building to contend in 2025?
Gotcha. So I got the roster up here, and we were talking QBs, so we have to start there because this is the top anyway. But this has got that league kind of you talked about, Jeff. He's got Jalen Hurts and CJ Stroud. And then behind those two, which again, those are set it and forget it as you can get 2 top 5 options. You're never going to be upset. But then Trey Lance and Jarrett Stidham, it falls off a cliff, right? I'd rather have more quarterbacks there on my bench, but either would teach their own. Running back, he's got Tyjae Spears, which appears to be his best option, I guess. You got Ray Davis in Buffalo. That might be something. Bucky Irving might be something. Roshan Johnson might be something. I mean, you got Rasheen Ali, which I think might be something. Like all these kind of upside plays that aren't probably all going to hit. But, hey, I love taking the chances. Receiver, he's got a couple of good options here. He's got Rome Odunze, which I really like, Chris Olave, Marvin Mims, Treylon Burks, maybe this is probably not. Mike Williams, Wan'Dale Robinson, KJ Osborne now in New England, Luke McCaffrey, the rookie, Ryan Flournoy, Jermaine Burton. So again, it's a little bit light after the first couple, but that's okay. Tight end, again, in a very tight end premium. He's got Kyle Pitts, Brock Bowers, Daniel Bellinger, Eric All, who I'm a fan of this year too, Noah Gray, Juwan Johnson, who could still put up points, and Cade Stover. So in terms of starting roster lineup kind of thing, I mean, you got to start 2 running backs, and it gets bleak after Tyjae Spears right away. So for me, if you could only start 1 running back, this team wouldn't be that bad. But man, having to start 2 feels a little rough. So Steven, also, I mentioned that we were going to be on tonight with his team, and he said he would pipe up in the chat with a trade that he just made. So he said he just made a trade since he submitted. He traded away Penix, McConkey, and a second for Olave, Burton, and a third. We were talking about Penix earlier there, Jeff. Like, what are your thoughts on that trade to get Olave, Burton, and a third? Does that feel too heavy to you to give up, or is that about right? It feels good to me. Honestly, I don't mind that.
That's a little aggressive for me, to be honest. I think that when it comes down to what you're trying to build here, having Michael Penix as my third quarterback, if I know I'm in a rebuild, I feel kind of good about that. When it comes down to points wise, are you really sold that Chris Olave is going to be way above Lad McConkey? Because what we saw last year with Chris Olave, I'm not super sold that that will be a significant point differential. And in this type of deal, that has to be a massive point differential. So, yeah, that
I think he's going on the fact
maybe,
that Penix. And this is maybe I'm assuming facts, not in evidence here. Steven can chime in again if he wants to, but I think Penix is an interesting trade candidate because again, it's unlikely that he gets any points this year, right? Like you mentioned it before, it's almost definitely going to be a red shirt. There is a world where he's the next Trey Lance and doesn't really ever get a chance, but there's also a world where Cousins stumbles really badly and Penix becomes the next guy and is like a Will Levis in a sense, right? Like the heir apparent takes over earlier and isn't a terrible option, but isn't a dominant one either. And so for me, like Penix is a fine one to trade away on the hopium side, like to get away from that. I don't know. I think this team is contending. I think it's maybe a couple of running backs away from contending, but I think you're close. It doesn't have a lot of depth, but sometimes those are the best leagues because you don't have to worry about lineups. You're just like, well, here's what I got. And there's some value there. But I don't mind getting Olave. I'm with you. I feel it's like a little heavy, but I don't mind this trade. I think McConkey is someone I'm not 100% sold on. Burton, I don't know if he's going to be anything as much as I want him to be here in Cincy, but I don't know. What do you think, Rocky, as the fan of older QBs? What are your thoughts on sending away a young one here?
I think it's a little closer for me than it is for Jeff, but I kind of lean towards the side he traded away in a rebuild.
Yeah.
I'm also not as high on Olave as some other people. I think he's fine, but I think he's probably a high-end wide receiver too for most of his career. I don't see him as this potential like top 5 wide receiver. Like I know like Russ Russ from Trade Addicts, my other co-host thinks of Olave as kind of a more higher end guy than I do. I'm not 100% sure what McConkey's going to do. I'm not as good of a rookie guy as Jeff, so
nobody
I do see the question marks there, but
a lot of people there.
And but I agree too that I kind of would like to hold on to Penix in a rebuild. I drafted him in a rebuild. I think I even drafted him. I think I was slightly above ADP. It was like late the first round or something like that. And I just even though I like Cousins a lot, like you said, there's a world. Cousins re-injures himself. Cousins starts looking old. Things can happen, and even if not, I think you can get out of his contract after 2 years if the Falcons want to justify just the fact that they took Penix and just want to get him. So I think it's close, and I don't hate the trade, but I think I would lean towards the side that he traded away there.
I almost feel like the pick should have been the other way, right? I feel like the Olave should have had the second, and the other side should have had the third. But that's getting a little nitpicky. And if that's the trade you wanted, then I'm not going to hate on that. But using that as a terrific entry point into Find Me a Trade. Now that trade is done, Rocky, you and I have very similar trades. So why don't you go first, and then I'll dovetail into mine after that, and we can kind of let Jeff wrap up at the end.
So I kind of didn't go exactly with what he said here because I'm making his RBs even more barren. But
you are.
Basically, and I don't think he has really, like you mentioned, a possibility of contending. I don't think he can contend this year almost no matter what.
I'm always the optimist. Jeff knows this of how I play poker. I'm always going to win. Every hand is amazing. It's hopium. So I say contend because that's just how I think. But I don't blame you. But go ahead.
That was my biggest struggle with even trying to find a trade for this team. Is I like a lot of the good, the pieces that are clearly good. Like I like those pieces a lot, but there's a lot of not good. And it's hard to figure out what to trade because most of his good pieces are young. So, and that's kind of what you want. So what I decided to try and do was tear down from a Rome Odunze a little bit, maybe, because, and you could argue how much of a tear down this is, but I do feel like Jordan Addison's, price is a little bit depressed right now. Maybe he's got some uncertainty at quarterback. He's got the whole legal issues thing going on. So that's kind of where my head was at. So I had him trading Rome Odunze, Spears, and 2/3. And the 2/3 are just to make it look nice because he has 3/3, and now you're sending 4 pieces. That was basically all my thinking was there. I know the thirds don't have a ton of weight in this. To Trader Joe for Jordan Addison and a 25 first. Just trying to get, another good young wide receiver. We saw Jordan Addison produced fairly well last year. I think I mentioned this on Trade Addicts this week as well. That we'd done a recent Dynasty game night where he had 2 overall wide receiver 1 games last year. It was part of a game we did recently in Dynasty game night. So, I mean, you see the upside there. We'll see what happens. McCarthy, Darnold, what's going to happen at quarterback? That obviously is an issue. But to me, it's not like Odunze is not without issues. I know everyone assumes Caleb Williams is going to be a stud quarterback. But even if he is, that may not happen this year. And even if he is, Rome Odunze may not be a stud this year with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore there. So his value probably doesn't increase this year. Even if it goes up, I don't think it increases this year. So you get another young piece that could be good, and you get a shot at 25 bursts. And part of my thinking too was, making his RBs even weaker, is that now he has 225 firsts. And Jeff can maybe correct me on this if I'm wrong, but from what I've heard, the 25 draft is a pretty good RB draft. So he can maybe fill, and he even says about talking about contending in 25. So maybe he'll have 2 firsts there. Maybe they can both be running backs, and he fills out, some of his running back spots that way, or trades those picks for multiple running backs, something like that. So and also the Trader Joe, just a nice little extra piece to it. Has Justin Jefferson, and maybe he doesn't want Justin Jefferson. I know some people don't like having a number 1 and number 2 receiver from the same team, even if they're both pretty good players. So I just thought that was another nice little maybe incentive for Trader Joe to trade Addison away. So that was my thinking on that one.
What do you think about that one, Jeff? What are your thoughts there before I get to mine?
I don't love moving Odunze off this roster. I think that he's going to be a producer sooner rather than later from what I've seen from camp. And really, I didn't even realize this was safe leagues when I started to do my analysis, and I actually love this team in safe leagues because the way that I try to build, I play in a lot of safe leagues, and the way that I try to do, this got 2 high-end tight ends. There's a massive tight end premium in safe leagues. So I like that a bit. It's got 2 high-end quarterbacks. I like that a lot. I think wide receiver is a little bit devalued in safe leagues because of the value in tight ends and running backs. And so I like Tajay Spears quite a bit too. And that's a player that I believe in. So I'm a little bit more iffy on that deal. Not that it's a bad deal, but get the
it's fine. You can rip my deal, Jeff. But also, I forgot to mention this, but also my thinking on Spears is I know a lot of people like Spears and like the talent, and I don't disagree. And we saw him be explosive at times last year. But my thinking is also he's potential, and he could be the 1A, but he's potentially a 1B back on a mediocre offense with, to me, a very mediocre quarterback. So I'm not sure how much you're getting out of him or how much his value increases this year. So that was kind of my thinking with him.
Yeah, that's not a bad angle. Yeah.
The way that I see Rome Odunze, though, is if we do get immediate production and Caleb Williams is everything that he's supposed to be, then I think Rome Odunze is going to be in that top 5-ish tier of dynasty wide receivers immediately. Next winter, we'll be talking about that.
I'm on the opposite. I don't think he's, I haven't been following what's coming, everything that's coming out of Bears camp, but just with, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, a rookie quarterback, no matter how good he is, not to mention Cole Kmet and DeAndre Swift there to steal targets here and there. I see it more as like a JSN type of season at best, and JSN's value didn't go. He's not a top 5 dynasty, but that's kind of how I look at Rome Odunze.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad angle either. And I think, Jeff, you're on the right track with, I think Odunze is going to be really good. And I think Odunze is going to be one of those guys that we look back on and go, damn, how did he get to the 9th? And, how did he get to Caleb Williams? And I like the future there. I actually don't mind this trade. I feel like I'd want maybe a little bit more. Maybe removing the thirds makes it feel a little better to me. But again, that's nitpicky. But my trade was in the same kind of vein where Rome might be your best receiver on this team. And if I'm going to contend, I would like to have a second running back that I could play every week and feel confident with. Again, you're only starting 3 receivers and you got 2 other flexes, but you're going to have one of those be your tight end. Almost definitely Bowers and Pitts will both play, I would think, again, because of the scoring. So my trade was to Pville to trade Rome for Devin Achane and Demario Douglas. And both of those would become starters, right? You're splitting Rome up. But the logic here is, I think Demario Douglas is going very under the radar for receivers. I think there's a chance that he is the number 1 receiver on New England. I mean, again, there's a bunch of names on that roster and a bunch of quarterbacks that we don't really know what's going to happen there. But I think, you could probably get a lot, maybe even more than that for Rome alone. But that's kind of the bones I would start with. If there's someone else you like more than Douglas, that's fine. But the way Pville's roster was lined up is, again, ironically, the one right next to this in the thing. But he's got a lot of running backs, and I feel like he probably wouldn't mind pivoting off of them because he's got Amon-Ra St. Brown at receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, and then it's kind of, I mean, Jaden Reed, I guess, Adonai Mitchell. Like, it gets a little bleak after that. But at running back, he's got David Montgomery, Rashad White, Javonte Williams, Zach Moss, Chase Brown, Devon Chain. Like, I think there's a chance you could get one of those running backs out of him for somebody like a Rome. And that's kind of where I would want to build my trade around. I think it's interesting. We both found trades for Rome, and one of them is kind of, pivoting into rebuild, and yours in a sense, and kind of going toward the future. Mine's trying to pivot to now and be like, well, I don't know how much Rome's going to get points wise, if it's going to be similar to Demario Douglas. I mean, if Pop Douglas is going to be a guy, I think it's going to get a lot of points. And then Achane obviously is should blow up, but how long is his leash and how long is he going to be there? So for me, this felt like, the opposite trade, but with the same player. But Rocky, I'll go to you first, being that it's the same player. What do you think about my version of a Rome Odunze trade?
Yeah, I don't mind that. I think, like, if you're trying to, even if you're not trying to win this year, I don't hate trading for Devin Achane because he is a young guy. I don't think he's gonna ever be a workhorse, which means he'll probably have a longer career in general. Just because he's always going to be splitting time with someone, and you're going to be banking a lot on being in that good Miami offense and the efficiency of just him as a player, because he is very explosive as well. So I kind of like that too, and I think it's pretty fair value. I mean, I think Rome is worth a first plus, and I think most Achane owners probably want a first plus. So I think that is, I think that's a nice. I just don't, like I said, I don't think he's contending this year. I can see it not even looking towards 25, because I think, Achane will still be a good player going forward.
Sure.
But you're always worried a little bit about rostering running backs that you don't need the points from this year. So that would be my only concern.
That's fair. Jeff, what about you? What are your thoughts? I know you were on the Rome hype train just a minute ago. Is this trade feel fair enough if you're believing Rome is top 5 kind of receiver talent?
No, it's. I mean, it's
I didn't think so.
I just,
that's fine. That's okay.
I believe in the talent of Rome quite a bit, and I see the argument. I mean, but Tank Dell was a rookie playing with rookie, and that wasn't even a top 10 pick, Tank Dell, that he got a lot of value off that. So I think that there's a path there, and so that's where Devin Achane, I would want to be winning right now if I were to go get Devin Achane, because I don't know how that's going to hold up long term. And like I said, Dunze, and really kind of what I'm trying to do here, you got a Dunze, you've got Chris Olave, just kind of for safe leagues. If I have 4 strong wide receivers, I'm feeling pretty good there, and I'm kind of just loading up on running back depth and waiting for injuries to happen to create starting opportunities. So
that was kind of my first thought when I saw this team, is like, oh, I don't hate this in safe leagues. Like I just want another running back to feel a little bit more secure for bye weeks and injuries, like we were just talking about. So my thought was, well, I think you can probably get the most for Rome. He just traded for Olave, which we didn't know prior to the show, right? But like, had you had Penix, you might have been able to get like Daniel Jones and a running back for Penix or something like that, where like you still get to keep a third quarterback that makes you feel a little bit protected, again, during bye weeks and whatever. But again, I don't think Olave is somebody I would necessarily feel like moving. There's no hype on his name right now. There's no, you're not getting the gas out of him. You're going to be trading low. So I don't mind that. But Rome as a rookie has got a lot of hype, and you've got some other rookies. You may be able to move somebody else too. So I know, Jeff, you had a couple of trades, which is now dwindled down to one trade on the show sheet. But why don't you tell people what your thoughts were on this trade here?
Well, one trade I was going to go target Romeo Doubs and Darnell Mooney off of a team that he just did the trade with. So that kind of, once I realized that kind of changed my attitude maybe a little bit there.
But real quick, I've done that before, where I make a trade with someone and then I go back and make another trade with them. And I'm like, it's just easier to do it in parts. You know what I mean? Like, so I get the logic. Maybe that would work.
Yeah, but one team that stood out to me, and maybe this is like Rocky, who's fine without having a single quarterback, but Temple Scribottom seems like he's kind of a mess with their quarterback situation, and they've also got multiple high-end vets. And so I'm kind of wondering what they're trying to do there. But that's a situation where maybe I would try to see on a guy like Cooper Kupp or something like that on kind of what's the price there, if he's still a depressed price. But the trade that I did put in here was flipping Blake Watson and Daniel Bellinger for Demarcus Robinson. Kind of one of those deals where I think that especially when think that we're in a rebuild, we want all these random young players. And I think more often than not, we're better off having an actual NFL player. And maybe I'm way too high on Demarcus Robinson, but I cover the Rams training camp for Football Guys, and I've read a lot of positive things about Robinson. We saw the way he ended last year, and that's the type of target where start to flip some of these deep speculative that probably won't do anything for actual NFL players. I do, going back, I like this team a lot in a safe league, because what I'm trying to do in safe leagues is I run very, very fragile, very thin and safe leagues where basically I want all my points in my starting lineup, and I'm trying to get, because what you can do in safe leagues, I love the way it's set up, because you can get a top 6 pick or a top 2 pick even and still be a playoff team because that of the way that it's set up. And so I'm really trying to run very, very, very fragile on all my safe leagues teams, where basically if I have 12 starters ish, like that's great for me, or 10 even, that's great for me. And so kind of looking at it as having, like, the way I see this, you got Hurts, you got Stroud, you got Odunze, you got Olave, you got Pitts, and you got Bowers. That's 6 cornerstone pieces.
Yep.
And so you're just trying to, week to week, without adding too many nonsense points to your roster, just have bodies that will get points in those other 4 spots. And that'll, because if you turn around and you add, like, if you flashback, if you had added a Bijan Robinson to this roster, or if you add like a Luther Burden or Ted Torre, McMillan, somebody like that coming up in next year's class, then you're cooking with some gas, where you've got 7, or your second round pick hits, maybe you got 7 or 8 guys that really look very, very strong all of a sudden.
I love this tiny little trade that you made, but at the same time, the logic and the thought process is brilliant, because you're right. Like, let's go get somebody like a Robinson that you can flip, after the season starts. I think too, Robinson might end up being a starter on this team, and you end up going 4-0, and guess what? Now you're pivoting to contend, right? Maybe something weird happens. You face some really good teams and you go 0-4. Great. You pivot to a rebuild, right? This is like one of those teams for me that's on a fence, but I always look at it like, well, if I'm going to pick one, I'm going to pick contend, right? If I'm not going to pick a rebuild out of the gate, I want to know for a fact I'm done. And with the team, like you just said, with a team with Hurts and Stroud and Pitts and Bowers and Olave and Odunze, like, that's a solid base that I don't think is far off. And then you still got Tyjae Spears. You could start Bucky Irving and maybe catch lightning there. I mean, like, there's a bunch of hope here that I think you could still go all the way. But also a trade like that Robinson trade, if most people aren't paying as much attention to the Rams practice as you, Jeff, let's be honest, and they might have missed that nugget, or they might not be paying attention to that. He might even drop Demarcus Robinson at some point, right? Like, that's where you got to feel him out. So Steven here in the chat is actually saying, like, I like that Robinson trade, makes a lot of sense. That's kind of where I'm at too. Like, maybe that's the missing piece to contend this year. Maybe that's a little thing that in 6 months we're looking back like, man, that was the whole thing. That was the whole season. Rocky, what are your thoughts on that, what I would call quote unquote tiny little Robinson trade that could change this whole team's outlook?
Yeah, I like that too. Demarcus Robinson, it's not just what's been happening. I mean, the end of last year, he was producing all over the place. He was scoring touchdowns, and I just looked it up. He had like 5 13 plus point weeks in a row, including a 20-point week in there. So he was a guy that was producing for them last year. And that was towards the end of the year when I think they had both Puka and Cooper Kupp. So
he locked down that wide receiver 3 spot that we've seen in that offense. If you flash back to when they had Brandon Cooks, Sammy Watkins, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods kind of rolling through there and having 3 relevant players regularly.
Yeah, and again, I still, no matter how many times you say it, I don't see this as a contending team this year. But even still, I agree with what Jeff said, in that the 2 guys you'd be trading away are, don't have that much value at all, future wise this year, anything. So If you can get but a lot of people, Demarcus Robinson doesn't either. And if you can get that, and then Demarcus Robinson picks up where he left off last year, you can even flip him even for a second or some other younger guy you like or something like that. So I like that a lot.
I like that a lot too. I think that's a perfect Jeff Bell trade, right? That's one of those like I'm going to sneak something in here, and that's where again I'm assuming things here, but I know in a lot of my like home leagues or casual leagues, everybody's like I'm not trading with you. You know something I don't. What is Demarcus Robinson? What is his deal? Like why do you want him? And I'm just like man, can I just get a good guy on my team? What the hell? But yeah, I think it's actually pretty perfect. So Steven in the chat did mention this. He did because we like that trade so much, Jeff. The one that you were talking about, what was your other trade idea? The other manager is a good trade partner. That is helpful information. Do you remember what your other trade was exactly, or kind of the bones of it? I know you mentioned it before.
The bones of it would be getting back Romeo Doubs and Darnell Mooney, who I also think are undervalued pieces that can be immediate producers this year. And it would be sending back Jermaine Burton and then kind of
something else, right?
There.
Yeah.
Like I was gonna rely on you guys, maybe the bridge,
maybe
the
like
gap
a Bellinger or a Jawan Johnson or like somebody who you're not high on.
Johnson on bench, like something like that of kind of bridge the gap where you're kind of selling on. And I know Dubs has kind of started to pick up a little bit of steam of late here in Packers camp, but I think Darnell Mooney's way under the radar, and I think Darnell Mooney is going to be, and maybe the injury to Rondale Moore will make people realize what's going to go on there. But I think Darnell Mooney's got a great shot to flirt with even 800 to 1,000-yard season and be kind of that wide receiver 3-ish territory. And so just kind of
Darnell Mooney could be their Demarcus Robinson.
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
Or they're Gabe Davis, or you know what I mean? Like
kind of like my thought on this roster of like if you start stacking up like a Darnell Mooney or a Dubs or a Demarcus Robinson or Mike Williams comes back healthy or Wan'Dale Robinson hits, all of a sudden you're bridging the gap there and having solid pieces. And if you do that, one, you can, like Andrew mentioned, you can flip those potentially, or two, then you shift and you start just throwing speculative darts with the rest of your bench to running backs, and that's where. And like I said, in safe leagues, I'm always trying to bridge that gap between like there's usually a tier of 6 or 7 in rookie drafts that I want to be inside, also a chance to win the league. And so like I kind of wanted to have that split of I'm going to have the 5th pick in the draft, or I'm going to be the league champion. Like that's my ideal way to play Dynasty.
Yeah, as you were saying that, and Steve mentioned this in the chat, I know he's a Burton stan. He says fan. I would call him a Burton stan. He loves Jermaine Burton. So I know he would hate to lose him. But it's another good idea, though.
Well, and again, the team that you're talking about, that franchise or Franch 18E, I don't know what that one exactly is. Maybe there's some inside joke there. But that is Justin Fields number 18 or something. Anyway, that's one of those where that trade – that team, I should say, has no real tight end to speak of. Like he's got Gerald Everett, Brevin Jordan, Brenton Strange, like maybe Daniel Bellinger gets that kind of deal done. You know what I mean? Like maybe there's some hype on his name, and the Giants, maybe he's the starter and he has a good week, and that's kind of where you pivot and say, hey, you need a tight end. Here's an upgrade there, and you can go get something like I don't want to say Burton and Bellinger. Let's see if you can do it without, but I think that's a good idea too, and especially if he's a good trade partner, that's always good to know, right? If there's somebody that you have good continuity with or good kind of banter with, maybe that could be an easier trade just to bring up. Be like, hey, what would it cost to get Dubs and Mooney? And he's like CJ Stroud. You're like, okay, that's ridiculous, right? But maybe this guy could actually be rational about it. So I think that's good, and I'm glad we're able to get to that as a second trade option, and hopefully that comes help. And here he is in the chat again. Steven, thank you so much. I think he's looking to tank. God, I hope so, because that team is brutal.
Well, like Romeo Dubs is like 24, but everybody thinks he's 28. So like,
but again, points are bad, and Dubs might get points. Mooney might get points, and Mooney might not have a lot of value after this year. Like, just get rid of those points if you're tanking. So I don't know. There's some options for you, Steven. Hopefully you can come up with some good ideas. Definitely keep us posted, whether it's in the DJ2 chat or via email. I don't know if we have email, but I'm sure you can figure out a way since you're not on Twitter. But thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much for giving us your time and energy tonight talking about QBs. Before we get all the way out of here, why don't you tell people where they can find you and what all you got coming up here as we head into the season?
Yeah, footballguys.com. So everything's over there. I'm on the Dynasty show with footballguys.com. I am the Dynasty captain at Football Guys. Oh. You can find my rankings. You can find my redraft rankings. You can find, and then in season, once we roll into the season, I host the Football Guys DFS show. I host the Sunday morning start sit show, and I host the Audible Live with Matt Waldman. And I might be adding a Friday injury show with Dave Kluge. We'll have to wait and see. So
that'll be fun.
there'll be 4 or 5 podcasts a week during the season that you can find me on with Football Guys, and then written content as well. I drop a big article. If you're a Dynasty player and you've never seen my Dynasty article that I drop every Monday morning during the season, send me a message and I'll gladly share a copy with you so you can read that, because I take a lot of time. I usually take 10 to 12 hours between Saturday or Sunday night and Monday morning to put that together, and it ends up being about 4,000 words on Dynasty every Monday morning. So that is an undertaking of love, and I do like 18 of those a year. So that takes a lot out of me, and I'm pretty proud of that piece. So.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, no, and I know you got a lot of good insights on Devi in college, like we mentioned, but all of that pivots really well into Dynasty and kind of getting the best and the most value. So really appreciate your thoughts here tonight. Rocky, is there anything you want to say before we get out of here? Anything you want to talk about as you're missing the expo? Are you still feeling FOMO or not yet?
Maybe not quite yet, but now that you brought it up again, who knows, Andrew?
Exactly. I'd just like to rub it in, man.
Just thanks again to Jeff for coming on. It's always a fun time talking to Jeff. And shout out to Mr. Scampers and Stephen Munger in the chat.
I meant to say this too. Last year, Scampers and I were both in a torrential downpour on Saturday and drinking beers out of my trunk. So again, it's just a tradition that we have. I'm sure I'll be drinking beers out of my trunk again this weekend. So I'm very excited for that. Sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to make sure I put Scampers in there.
That was basically all I had. I just wanted to give a shout out to the chat.
Yes, thank you to Stephen for submitting. Thank you for being in and helping us talk through things live. I love when we get to do that with you. So with that, we're going to take it out of here and get ready, rest up. Jeff and I got to go have a party weekend with everybody and talk about this and make Rocky feel really upset that he's not able to make it. But Rocky's got a family or something like that and has to go party with them instead. That's fine. You've made your choice. But with that, we're going to get out of here. Thank you so much for everybody for listening, for tuning in. And with that, we'll say Junkies out.